was 17 when this happened, and honestly, I still don't like talking about it. It was a Friday night during summer break, and my parents had gone out for dinner with some friends. My little brother was staying at a friend's house, so I had the place to myself for a few hours. I ordered a pizza, watched some TV, and around 11, I went upstairs to take a shower. Nothing weird, just a normal Friday night. When I came back downstairs, I noticed the back door was open. I remember being annoyed because I was sure I'd closed it. I walked over and pulled it shut. Then I noticed something on the kitchen floor. There was dirt on the tile. Not much. Just a few little footprints near the back door. I figured my dad had probably come home earlier and tracked something in. I cleaned it up and forgot about it. About 20 minutes later, I heard something hit the side of the house. It sounded like a garbage can being knocked over. I looked through the kitchen window. The backyard was completely dark. I turned on the porch light, but I couldn't see anything. I almost went outside. Then I thought better of it. I went back to watching TV. Maybe 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. She asked if everything was okay. I said yeah. Then she asked me something that didn't make any sense. "Are you sure?" I laughed and asked why. She said my dad had gotten an alert from the home security camera. There had been movement in our backyard. I told her I'd already heard something outside. She told me to lock every door and stay upstairs. That's when I started getting nervous. I checked the front door. Locked. Side door. Locked. Back door. Locked. Then I walked upstairs. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard something downstairs. A drawer opening. I froze. At first I thought it was the refrigerator. Then I heard another sound. A cabinet door closing. Someone was inside the house. I grabbed my phone and locked myself in my bedroom. I didn't call out. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there listening. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow footsteps. One step at a time. They stopped outside my bedroom. I could see the shadow underneath the door. Someone was standing there. I held my breath. Then the person tried the doorknob. Once. Twice. Then they stopped. I thought they had left. Then I heard something that still bothers me. A quiet voice from the other side of the door. "Hey." I didn't answer. "Your mom said I could come in." I knew immediately that was a lie. My mom wasn't home. I called 911 without making a sound and whispered my address. The person outside my door stayed completely silent. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the footsteps moved away. I heard them going downstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the front door slam. The police arrived shortly after. They searched the house and didn't find anyone. At first, they thought the person had gotten in through the back door. Then one of the officers went into the backyard. He came back inside and asked me something. "Did you hear anybody outside before you found the dirt?" I told him about the garbage can. He nodded. Then he showed me something on his phone. The security camera had recorded the backyard. The footage showed a man walking across our yard almost an hour before I ever noticed anything. He wasn't trying to hide. He walked right past the camera. He stopped at our back door and stood there for almost 3 minutes. Then he opened it. The part that made me sick was what happened next. He didn't immediately go inside. He stood outside the doorway and waited, like he was listening to the house. Then he walked in. The police searched the footage again. The man had been inside our house for almost 40 minutes before I came downstairs. 40 minutes. He had been there while I was upstairs taking a shower. He had been there while I was sitting on the couch watching TV. And when I heard the noise in the kitchen, he wasn't outside. He was already inside. The police never found him. But there was one thing they couldn't explain. Remember those footprints I found near the back door? They weren't from my dad. They weren't mine. The officer said they matched the shoes the man was wearing in the footage. I've lived in 3 different houses since then. I still lock every door before I go to bed. And whenever I'm home alone, I check the entire house. Not because I think someone is hiding there. I just don't ever want to make the mistake of assuming I'm alone again. I was probably 9 or 10 when this happened. I don't remember the exact year, but I remember the house. It was an older 2-story house, and the basement was the kind of place I hated going into by myself. My parents used it mostly for storage, so there wasn't much down there besides boxes, an old freezer, and a bunch of stuff nobody ever seemed to throw away. One night, my dad was working late, and my mom was upstairs doing laundry. I was in the living room watching cartoons. I had the TV turned up pretty loud, so I didn't notice much going on around me. Then I heard my mom call my name. It sounded like she was downstairs. I paused the TV. Yeah? Nothing. I waited a few seconds. Then I heard her again. My name. Same voice, same tone. I figured she was probably in the basement looking for something, so I got up and walked over to the basement door. The light was off. I opened the door and called down, "Mom?" No answer. I started down the stairs. There were maybe 12 steps. I was about halfway down when I heard her again. "Come down here." I stopped. She sounded like she was standing right at the bottom. I remember feeling a little annoyed because I thought she was messing with me, so I kept going. When I reached the bottom, the basement was completely empty. I looked behind the freezer. Nothing. I checked the little laundry area. Nobody. "Mom?" Nothing. I started walking back upstairs. That's when I heard her voice again, but this time, it came from behind me. "Hey." I froze. I slowly turned around. The basement was dark except for the little bit of light coming down the stairs. I couldn't see anyone. Then I heard my name again. Not from upstairs, from the far corner of the basement. I ran. I don't think I've ever climbed stairs that fast in my life. I slammed the basement door behind me and ran straight upstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway folding clothes. I grabbed her arm. "Mom, stop calling me." She looked confused. "I didn't call you." I told her what happened. She laughed at first because I was a kid and probably scared myself. Then she saw how serious I was. She walked downstairs with me and turned on every light. Nothing. No one. She checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. She told me it was probably the pipes or the furnace. I didn't believe her. I slept in my parents' room that night. For a while, I forgot about it. Years passed. I eventually moved out. My parents eventually sold the house. I hadn't thought about that night in years. Then one afternoon, I was helping my mom clean out some old boxes in her garage. We found a stack of photographs from the house. I started looking through them. There were pictures of me as a little kid. My sister, my parents, birthday parties, Christmas. Nothing unusual. Then I found a photograph I'd never seen before. It was a picture of me standing in the basement. I was probably 9. I was looking toward the camera. I asked my mom who took it. She looked at the picture. Then she said something that made me stop. "I didn't take that." I laughed. "Well, Dad must have." She shook her head. "Your dad wasn't home that night." I looked at the picture again. It wasn't a great photo. The lighting was terrible. But you could clearly see me standing near the bottom of the basement stairs. And behind me, there was an open door. I asked my mom what room that was. She stared at it for a few seconds. Then she told me something I'd never known. There was no door there. That wall had always been solid. At least, that's what she remembered. I asked her when the picture was taken. She checked the date written on the back. It was the same night I remembered hearing her call my name. I still don't know who took that picture. My mom says she doesn't remember it. My dad doesn't either. And I honestly don't know what scares me more. The fact that somebody may have been in that basement with me, or the fact that whoever took the picture was standing close enough to get it. I was 21 when this happened, and at the time I was living alone for the first time. It was a small apartment in a pretty boring part of town. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, tiny kitchen, thin walls, and a parking lot that was always half empty. Honestly, I loved it. After living with roommates for years, having my own place felt amazing. I could come home whenever I wanted, leave dishes in the sink, stay up late. Nobody cared. One night after work, I got home around 11. I remember being exhausted. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen because I hadn't eaten anything since lunch. I opened the refrigerator. There was almost nothing inside, so I ordered a pizza. While I was waiting, I took a shower and changed into sweatpants. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it. The delivery guy handed me the pizza and left. Nothing unusual. I ate on the couch while watching TV. Around midnight, I started getting tired, so I turned everything off and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed something strange. My front door wasn't locked. I stood there staring at it. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. I even had this stupid habit of checking the handle twice before going to bed. I figured maybe the lock hadn't caught properly, so I didn't think much of it. That night, I checked it 3 times. Locked. The next morning, unlocked again. That's when I started getting uncomfortable. I called the apartment manager and asked if anyone had entered my apartment. She said no. I asked if maintenance had been inside. She said nobody had been scheduled. I changed the batteries in the lock and forgot about it. At least, I tried to. A few days later, I noticed my bathroom cabinet was open. I never leave it open. I closed it. The following morning, it was open again. Then I noticed my bedroom closet door was slightly open. Then a kitchen cabinet. None of it was dramatic. Nothing was missing. I actually started wondering if I was becoming forgetful. Then one night, I came home and noticed something on my kitchen counter. A glass of water. I don't drink water from glasses. I use a bottle. I remember standing there for probably a full minute trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe my memory was worse than I thought. Maybe I'd had someone over and forgotten. I checked my phone. Nothing. No messages, no calls. I went through my apartment. Nobody was there. I dumped the water out and went to bed. The next morning, I called my landlord again. This time I told her I thought someone might be entering my apartment. She didn't laugh. She said she'd have someone check the building's security cameras. That afternoon, she called me back. There was footage from the hallway. Someone had been standing outside my apartment door at around 3 in the morning. The person wasn't wearing a uniform, wasn't carrying anything. They just stood there for almost 10 minutes. Then they walked away. The camera wasn't clear enough to identify them. I bought a cheap indoor camera and pointed it toward the front door. That night, I went to bed like normal. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the app. Someone was standing inside my apartment. I could see the back of their head. They were standing in my kitchen. I couldn't move. I watched the screen. The person slowly turned toward the camera. Then they walked out of view. I called the police. When they arrived, they searched the apartment. Nobody was there. The windows were locked. The front door was still locked. There was no obvious way anyone could have gotten inside. Then one officer noticed something. My bedroom closet. The door was open. He pulled the clothes aside. There was a small access panel behind them. I had never noticed it. It led into the maintenance space between the apartments. The officer opened it. There were fresh footprints in the dust. Someone had been using that space. They followed the prints. They led to another access panel. This one opened into the hallway. The police never found whoever had been inside. I moved out less than a week later. The strangest part wasn't finding the access panel. It was what the officer told me afterward. He said whoever had been entering my apartment probably wasn't stealing anything. They were probably just watching me. I asked him how long he thought it had been happening. He looked at me for a second. Then he said, "Long enough that you stopped noticing the little things." I still think about that, because he was right. The unlocked door, the cabinets, the closet, the glass of water. I kept finding things that didn't make sense, and every time I found a way to explain them. I haven't lived alone since, and I still have one habit I can't seem to break. Whenever I walk into a room, I look at the door first, just to make sure it's exactly the way I left it. I was 12 when my best friend and I found a human head in an abandoned house. I know how that sounds. If someone had told me that story when I was 12, I probably would have laughed at them. But I still remember exactly what that house looked like. My friend Stevie lived 2 houses down from me, and we basically spent every afternoon together. We rode our bikes around the neighborhood, played video games, messed around at the park, just normal kid stuff. Our neighborhood wasn't exactly the safest place, though. There were a lot of empty houses, and everybody knew which streets you probably shouldn't be walking down after dark. One night, Stevie and I were riding around with nothing to do when he suggested we check out an abandoned house we'd been curious about for months. It had been empty for years. The windows were covered in dirt, the yard was completely overgrown, and nobody ever seemed to go near it. We parked our bikes behind a bush and walked up the driveway. We were laughing about something when Stevie suddenly stopped. He pointed at one of the upstairs windows. "Wait!" I looked up. There was a face looking through the curtains. Someone was standing there, just staring at us. We stopped laughing. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. The face didn't move, not even a little. I remember thinking whoever it was must have been watching us. Stevie whispered, "That's creepy as hell." We moved a little closer. That's when we noticed something was wrong. The face wasn't moving because it wasn't a person. It looked like a mannequin head, or some kind of Halloween decoration. We could actually see the pale face sitting between the curtains. We started laughing again. We were 12. Obviously, the next thing we wanted to know was how somebody had gotten it up there, so we decided to sneak around back. The back door was unlocked. We stood there for a few seconds. Stevie looked at me. I looked at him, and then we went inside. The house smelled horrible. Not like mold, not like an old house. It smelled like something had been rotting inside. We kept our phone flashlights off because we didn't want anyone outside to see us. We walked through the kitchen and into the living room. The fake head was sitting on the windowsill. Up close, it looked incredibly realistic. Stevie reached for it. He picked it up and immediately dropped it. He didn't say anything. He just stared at his hand. Then he looked at me. "That's not fake." I laughed. I thought he was messing with me. Then I touched it. It was warm. Not room temperature. Warm. I pulled my hand back. Neither of us moved. There was a dark red liquid running from the bottom of the head onto the windowsill. For a second, I still didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I realized there was hair attached to the scalp. It wasn't a prop. It was a real human head. We both started screaming. We ran toward the back door, and that's when we heard something above us. A loud crack, like someone had stepped on a floorboard. We stopped. Another crack. This one closer. Someone was upstairs. Stevie grabbed my arm. "Go!" We ran. We didn't even bother getting our bikes. We sprinted all the way home. The police came later that night. They searched the house. I never found out exactly who the person was. I only remember my mom telling me to never go near that house again. For a while, I thought the scariest part was finding the head. It wasn't. A few days later, Stevie and I were talking about it at school. He suddenly asked me something. "Did you hear the breathing?" I told him no. He said he had. While we were standing in the living room, he said he could hear someone breathing from upstairs. I didn't believe him. Then he reminded me of something. When we first saw the face in the upstairs window, the curtains had been closed. But when we ran out of the house, the curtains were open. Someone upstairs had been watching us, and whoever it was had been there the entire time. I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and after what happened, I never used it again. I was living with a roommate at the time, and we had this stupid idea that our apartment needed a ping pong table. We found one listed for pretty cheap. The guy selling it lived about 20 minutes away, so I messaged him and asked if I could pick it up that night. He said sure. Nothing about the conversation seemed weird. He gave me an address and told me to come around 9. I took my truck, removed the back seats, and drove over. When I got there, the front door was already open. I texted him that I'd arrived. A few seconds later, a guy appeared in the doorway. He looked like he was probably in his 50s, gray hair, heavy build, and a really deep, raspy voice. He barely said hello. He just looked at my truck and said, "It's in the basement." I followed him inside. The house smelled like cigarette smoke. Not fresh smoke. More like the smell had been sitting in the walls for years. He led me downstairs. The ping pong table was sitting right in the middle of the basement, exactly like he'd promised. I looked it over and told him it looked good. He nodded. Then he suddenly said, "Hang on, I forgot the paddles." He walked upstairs. "I'll be right back." I figured I'd just wait. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started getting bored. There wasn't much to look at down there, but I noticed some old photographs sitting on a shelf. Most of them were pictures of the guy himself. Him fishing. Him standing in front of the house. Him with a dog. There were no pictures of friends or family. Then I noticed a small room at the back of the basement. It looked like a laundry room mixed with storage. I don't know why, but I walked over. There was a desk in there. One of the drawers was slightly open. I pulled it out. There were photographs inside. At first I thought they were just old Polaroids. Then I looked closer. They were pictures of a young woman. She was tied to a chair. Her mouth was covered. Some pictures showed her looking directly at the camera. Others looked like they had been taken from across the room. I remember just staring at them. I couldn't process what I was looking at. Then I noticed there were a bunch of yellow folders stacked underneath the photographs. Each one had a letter written on it. A, B, C, D, all the way down the stack. I didn't open them. I didn't want to know what was inside. I took out my phone to photograph the pictures. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I realized I'd been down there way too long. I shoved the pictures back into the drawer and ran toward the stairs. I grabbed the basement door. It wouldn't open. I tried again. Nothing. Locked. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then I heard his voice. Right outside the door. "Sorry about that." I didn't answer. He laughed quietly. I must have locked it without realizing. I heard him step away. Then he said, "Give me a second, I'll find the key." I don't know why, but something in the way he said it made my stomach drop. I backed away from the door. Then I started looking around the basement. I saw the desk again. I ran back and opened every drawer. There were screwdrivers, pliers, tape, batteries, a bunch of random tools. I grabbed 3 screwdrivers and ran back to the door. The lock was old. I tried one, didn't fit. Second one, didn't fit. The third one barely went into the keyhole. I pushed it in and started twisting. Nothing. I tried again. The lock moved. I heard something outside the door. A quiet knock. "Everything okay down there?" I didn't answer. I twisted the screwdriver as hard as I could. The lock finally turned. I opened the door and ran. I didn't even look upstairs. I didn't look for the guy. I just ran through the front door, jumped into my truck, and drove. I went straight to the police station. I showed them the pictures I'd managed to take. They sent officers to the address. The house was empty. The guy was gone. But they found the basement. They found the photographs. They found the folders. And they found something else. A second room behind the laundry room. The police told me they couldn't give me all the details, but there was evidence that someone had been held there. They also found several pieces of personal property that didn't belong to the homeowner. Phones, wallets, driver's licenses, things like that. The part that still bothers me is what they found in the drawer where I'd gotten the photographs. There was a folder with my name on it. Not my first name, my full name. And underneath it was the exact address where I lived. The police asked me if I'd ever met the man before. I hadn't. They asked if I'd given him my name. I hadn't. The only thing I'd given him was my first name when we'd arranged the pickup. They never figured out why my information was in that basement. The guy disappeared before they could arrest him. And I never found out who the woman in those pictures was. I don't think about that night very often anymore, but there's one thing I still remember. When I first arrived at the house, the guy didn't ask me what I was there for. He didn't ask if I was the guy from Craigslist. He just looked at my truck and said, "It's in the basement," like he'd already been waiting for me. When I was 14, I babysat for a 6-year-old boy named Cody. I'd only watched him a couple of times before this, so I didn't know him that well. Before his parents left that afternoon, they gave me the usual instructions. There was money on the counter if we wanted pizza. He had to be in bed by 9, and I wasn't supposed to let him go into their bedroom. Before they walked out, Cody's mom mentioned something else. She said Cody could be a little different from other kids. Not in a bad way. He just spent a lot of time talking to himself when he played. Sometimes, he'd talk to his imaginary friend. She smiled when she said it, like it was nothing unusual. I asked what the friend's name was. Agnes. That was it. The afternoon was completely normal. It was pouring outside, so Cody couldn't play in the yard. I put something on TV while he sat on the floor with his toys. Every once in a while, I'd hear him talking. At first, I assumed he was just making his toys talk to each other. But after a while, I started noticing something. He kept pausing, like he was waiting for someone to answer him. Then he'd respond, "Okay, no, you do it. I don't want to." Stuff like that. I looked over at him and asked who he was talking to. He looked at me like the answer was obvious. Agnes. I laughed a little and went back to watching TV. A few minutes later, I heard Cody say, "Agnes wants that one." He was pointing across the room at one of his toys. I told him to go get it. He shook his head. "She has it." I looked over. The toy was sitting on the floor. Nobody was touching it. I remember feeling a little uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything. Kids say weird things, especially 6-year-olds. Later that night, after we'd eaten pizza, Cody was playing in the living room while I cleaned up. I asked him if he wanted something to drink. He said, "Agnes already gave me some." I stopped. There was no drink in front of him. I asked him what he meant. He pointed toward the empty end of the couch. She was sitting there. I looked at the couch. Nothing. I told myself not to overthink it. His parents had literally warned me about this. He had an imaginary friend. That was all. Around 9, I told Cody it was time to get ready for bed. He didn't argue. He just got quiet. Then he looked toward the hallway. "Agnes doesn't want me to go yet." I asked him why. He didn't answer. He just kept looking down the hallway. I remember turning around. The hallway was empty. I told him again that it was bedtime. This time, he stood up and followed me upstairs. About 20 minutes later, I was in the bathroom washing my hands when I heard 3 knocks on the door. I assumed it was Cody. "Cody?" No answer. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. I walked out and looked toward Cody's room. His door was closed. I could hear him moving around inside. I was about to go back into the bathroom when I heard another sound. A slow creak. I looked toward the end of the hallway. The door to the parents' bedroom was opening, very slowly. I just stood there. I thought maybe the air had pushed it, but all the windows were closed. The door opened a little farther, then stopped. I walked toward it. Honestly, I thought Cody might have been messing with me. I pushed the door open. Cody was sitting on the far side of the bed. I froze. He wasn't supposed to be in there. "Cody, what are you doing?" He looked at me. Then he looked toward the doorway behind me. I asked him again, "Who opened the door?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked past me. Then he said, "Agnes." I grabbed Cody and took him downstairs. I didn't care if he was supposed to be in bed. We stayed in the living room until his parents got home. The weird thing was, Cody didn't seem scared. He actually looked confused, like I was the one acting strange. When his parents finally came home, I didn't tell them what happened. I just wanted to leave. A few weeks later, Cody's mom called and asked if I could babysit again. I never called her back.